guys a little bit of a background um, of career, just so you know where I'm coming from.
Cool.
Uh,
Mhm.
I just knew at an early age that I wanted to do art and draw comics.
Okay.
Um, like 12, I decided that. And then by 15, I kind of became very serious about comics and started studying everything I could uh, to prepare myself for it and learn about the industry and everything else. So I kind of decided at 12, I'm going to draw Spider-Man in 10 years. I set a goal for myself. And that didn't turn out to happen. But instead, I kicked off the career by self-publishing a comic book called Trollords. So my
Hmm.
buddy and I formed a company called True Studios, and and he was a guy I met when I was 15 in high school. And then because of the way the direct sales distribution system was set up, we were able to plug into that, probably about a year and a half after the Teenage Mutant Ninja Turtles started. So although we had created Trollords prior to that, when we saw a few things start to come out, being self-published, we thought we could throw our hat in the ring too. So when the black and white explosion happened in early 1986, we were at the forefront of that. Maybe Fish Police was a comic that debuted maybe 6 months or a few months before we did. And by the summer of that year, you know, it was crazy. And by the year after that, everything went bust. But we had done enough to, do well with the comic and establish ourselves in the industry, that it kicked off a handful of careers of people who worked on the book with us or around it. And a friend of mine who was our editor on Trollords, um, after about a year and a half on Trollords, was hired by DC and became an editor there, Brian Augustin. And so then I started getting work even while I was working on Trollords and self-published stuff. I started inking at DC Comics, and for about 10 years, I inked and lettered a bunch of comics in the indie world, and for DC and Topps Comics, and some work for First Comics as well. After that period of time, I don't know how or why, but um, and I did something I never thought I would do because I was kind of doing my dream job. I found that doing comics within the work for hire world, after having tasted the freedom of self-publishing and ownership, that it wasn't as satisfying as I thought. And then I started doing illustration and comics outside of the industry, and I did that for I'm still doing that to some extent, but really solid for 25 years. So I was able to do a lot of storyboards for commercial clients. A lot of, I never thought when we moved up to Minneapolis here that I would work for all the big companies, but I ended up doing all that. So 3M and Target and Best Buy and General Mills and Pillsbury, I did a lot of work with them and did a lot of illustration for Famous Dave and his barbecue restaurants and other things as well. So just did a lot of different work, and I kind of flipped the equation on the comics thing, because I knew everyone I knew did a lot of work. And even though I made an okay living inking at DC, it was doing a lot of work for less money in some fashion and some calculation. So I found that by doing the illustration work and comics outside the industry, I was doing less work for more money. And I didn't mind that, especially with my wife and I having two kids. She's an artist as well. So we were able to, for 14 years while they were growing up, work together on a variety of projects, and then also raise the kids here together. And they're both grown now. They're 24 and 28 and doing well in life. But we felt very fortunate that that was our dream, was to live at home and raise the kids, work at home, and do the kind of art we wanted to. And then we somehow were able to pull it off and built a house up here and had a big old home studio, and felt pretty lucky. On top of those kinds of clients I mentioned earlier, um, I was inspired by Eisner's moves in his career, having owned the spirit that was he was able to have the spirit um, published, right, in police comics, and the 3 different careers in that, the early strip stuff and the Spirit, and then he worked for that military magazine for 20 years while doing books like Death and Taxes and stuff like that. And then, teaching, and then doing that third part of his career with the graphic novel stuff and all that work he did later on a much smaller scale. I felt I was able to do that, and ended up working for a variety of companies using comics to reach a wide audience and as a communication device. Work for the U.S. Census Bureau, National Kidney Foundation with gigantic posters to help people, learn about it and get diagnosed, and about treatment, things like that. Jewish for comics, historical comics for Jewish kids. We did those for about 5 years. Food action safety kit for for all the public schools in America. So we were able to tap on a broad scale, nationally anyway, a lot of these larger clients that use comics for those purposes. And I was pleased to be able to do that and proud of it, and to try to keep that moving, keep comics moving and applied that way. And then just as a brief, personal note, when my girls were about 9 and 12, I got on a snowmobile one night with a friend, and I shouldn't have gone, and I slammed into a tree, slid into it sideways. This was about 15 years ago. So I could have died on the spot, and instead I just busted a bunch of bones and punctured my lung, but a few months later developed PTSD. And so the last 15 years in that regard has become quite a ride. And I'm still dealing, with physical pain with that too. But, in that moment, and I'm in my mid 40s at that time, I was on the phone with my wife, and I started having this full body panic attack. This is maybe 10 days, a week after the accident, and with my name scrawled on it, for the nurses to remember my name, and I thought I was just checking out, and and they're checking my blood pressure and everything else, and they're like, "You're fine," but I didn't feel fine, and but in that moment, they tell you your life flashes before your eyes and your whole life, and it just didn't happen for me. Instead, I was thinking, what am I going to miss? I won't be here for my wife and my daughters, and all those projects that I wanted to get to, I won't get to. And then, I calmed down, but like 3 months later, the PTSD hit hard. So it's been a real, a bear struggle in a lot of ways. But before that PTSD hit, maybe 3 weeks after the accident, when my body was still racked with pain from breaking my collarbone and 9 ribs in the whole shot, I contacted a friend of mine, a guy named Larry Martyr, who's done Bean World, and I think he was the CEO at McFarlane Toys for about 15 years. And I just asked him, having already I'd sent out a bunch of pitches for a children's book prior to the accident to book publishers, and got no takers. But Larry told me about Jim Valentino at Image Comics was doing a children's book line, and I sold it within an hour to him, only 3 weeks after that accident. So I tried my best while figuring out the health stuff and managing that, which has been an up and down roller coaster struggle, to still get out there and do my own work. And that book was published, I don't know, maybe a year after I hit the tree. And that was the first of those kind of projects that I was able to see to fruition after that accident. So it was kind of a wake-up call in many ways. And about 3 years after the accident, I started teaching at the Minneapolis College of Art and Design. They have a 4-year comics program here, and it's the longest running one, as far as I can tell, for that kind of accredited course. And my friend who also teaches there um, had been after me to teach there for about 7 years, and I kept saying no, just because it didn't line up, with the girls, how old they were and the kind of work I was doing. I couldn't give up the income. And then after the accident, it turned out, as I was getting older, to be a really good fit. So that's how I've spent, at least as a part-time adjunct, in adjunct capacity, teaching comics. I'm starting my 13th year now this semester. I told you some of that because some of the work that we can look at, I think my line and my approach to drawing has changed a little bit because of the accident. So I thought that would inform things a little bit. Before I try to bring something up here to show you, anybody have any thoughts or concerns or questions about anything that I've mentioned so far? Or
I got a question about the college course. So,
yeah,
do the kids do they get jobs in the industry after they graduate?
yeah, some do. I'm actually pretty conflicted about the whole thing in that I think college is way too expensive and kind of a scam in a lot of
Mhm.
ways. And so and that's one could argue is especially true for the arts. So the way I look at it is that I'm going to plug myself in the system because people can uh, access us there, and I think the program does good work. So if people are signing in and coming on, then I figure we'll just do the best we can uh, to to give them as best instruction as possible.
Yeah.
Um,
Mhm.
your question again was the last part of your question?
Well, I'm just wondering, so like, an 18-year-old,
Yeah,
what happens after they graduate? Do
gotcha.
they like
Yeah,
move to New
thanks for
York
think.
City or what?
Yeah, thanks for the reminder. I think I think what happens a lot of some people graduate and they're kind of burnt out and find out it's not what they want to do. And then a handful of, like a third of them, maybe a little more, keep doing art or comics in sub capacity, even if it's not their main source of income.
Yeah.
And then there are those people who are either precocious within the program, or they start really developing in the last couple years of the program, and they've launched careers. So there are students that were in my very first intro class in 2012 who are out there and getting book deals at Scholastic or Putnam and so on, or just they have an agent and one of them is working at for a book from IDW. So I don't think the
Really?
percentage is as high as I would like. But on
Yeah.
the other hand, there are some really successful people who've gone out and done that. In my first class was an artist named Chan Chow, who very prolific and doing their own work, and they own their own work, and they've been nominated for Eisners. But then
Nice.
the last few years, they did the most recent two Babysitters Club's books after Raina, and then another
Oh,
artist did it, and those were New York Times bestseller books and did very well. And Chan was in town around Thanksgiving and asked to come visit the class. And so it was good for students to get that, with some of our past students who come in, they get kind of a real world, no holds barred take on that it ain't always easy out there, even if you do get a book deal or one published. But they've also seen students graduate from MCAD like Chan, or Rosemary Valero O'Connell, who, what did they do? Book with Mariko Tamaki. Which one was that? Laura Dean, I think it was called, and that was
Yeah.
nominated as well. So Rosemary's done very well. I never had Rosemary in a class, but did know Rosemary the last couple of years there. So I think there is a little bit of a track record now at MCAD where people are, getting uh, getting some things that they need, and then finding some success. Rosemary started doing pro work at Zoom, was it Boom Studios, even before they graduated. So some people, like I said, are just precocious. But one thing I really do like at MCAD is that, and I don't find this to be true in every art college, is that a prerequisite for the degree is to take a comics professional practice class. So and I've taught that a handful of times. And we try our best then to not only give people the history of like what the business end of comics has been over the last 100 years or what, however long, um, and then direct distribution and everything else, but also what are the 12 comics industries now? Because they're separate little mini industries or sub industries as far as I can discern, and some of them don't even pay attention to each other. So I think that, when I was coming up, when I was that teenager, my entry point for comics really I thought was, well, learn anatomy, draw superheroes, and work for the big two. And then more those smaller companies like First and Eclipse started coming on. But for me, the models really were Dave Sim and Cerebus and Wendy and Richard Pini with ElfQuest. And when I saw them, and I guess you could put Jack Katz and First Kingdom in that group too, they really were the models for me. And at a certain point, I started realizing that the kind of stories I wanted to tell, I wanted to have control over them. And self-publishing turned out to be the entry point for that, or the venue for it. So I think I had fewer opportunities trying to break in then, but less competition. And now there's more opportunities, but it's really hard to get eyeballs and to get traction, and they gotta have to fight for it. So there's more options for them, and they can pick a certain path. And some of them have successful web comics, let's say, and some every once in a while we'll have webtoons come in and talk at MCAD. Sometimes uh, they're selling webtoons a little too much, so we limit it a little bit here and there. But that's what we try to do, and I hope that answers the question.
Yeah, it does. Yeah, the business angle it's kind of important for kids to understand the business.
Yeah.
Yeah.
I think so, and a lot of them. It's almost like some of the business kind of words, at least when I started teaching ProPrac, were almost dirty words.
Yeah.
And
Right.
I always tell them it's a semantical thing, and don't just call it whatever you want. If you don't want to call it networking, call it getting to know people. But just get yourself out there. And if you're not, if you're socially, introverted, then find ways online to get out there and get your work there and get seen and get to know people. So, um, yeah, I think you're right. We try to expose them to all these different
Yeah.
ways they can go about it and get their work out there, and then what success means, monetarily or otherwise, will be up to them as they pick their path and see it through.
Thanks.
Yep. Anything else before I see if I can share a slideshow of some kind?
I'm looking forward to the art.
I will, let me see which one I can do here. Okay.
Yes.
All right, good.
Yes.
Well, sorry, that was a little hitch, but we got through it. So one of the things I wanted to say as we're clicking through this stuff is that, I came up when I was younger, I really wanted to put as much detail in things as possible. And I think, as a lot of young artists do, you are trying to prove you can draw. And so even if Alex Toth was a favorite of mine, even when I was younger, it took me some 5 or 10 years till I started practicing that more. And then after the accident, and the whole thing is, right, I'm being very careful, and I'm all about thin and thick and traditional inking and feathering and all that kind of stuff when I'm doing my work. And because of the Cerebus influence, I was working like with cross hatching a lot and so on. And then I found that after the accident, and being anxious and everything, although I could still kind of calm my hand down a little bit, and that picture book I said that I had sold has a very clean kind of Dr. Seuss, Chuck Jones kind of look. I don't even know how I did it, but I remember just shaking like crazy and having to work on a lap board in the living room to be around people, because I'd go into a panic attack if it was downstairs alone in the studio. And I look at that book now, and all the lines look great, but it sure didn't feel that way. But because of the accident and my line wasn't as clean as it used to be, and it kind of gave me an opportunity to change my line. And as opposed to working big and then getting all and reducing down to clean things up, I'm far more
Mhm.
likely now to draw on the roughest paper possible with a thick tool. Um, and I'm more apt to draw small and blow it up. I like the quality of that more than the flip side of how I started my career. So these are just quick sketches that I do. Sometimes I'll pull out I don't know, I tend to work with two or three different tools. A brush pen, a Tombow brush pen is what I usually am drawing with. In this case, the teal fountain pen you see is a Pilot Metropolitan fountain pen. Has a thinner line, but that has a quality I like. And then I use the Pentel pocket brush. And aside from dipping and all the stuff I used to do with a Hunt Crow quill, or I think I used the Pentel color brush, but I would still dip it. So it was even synthetic then. Um, I tend to use these instead, and not having to dip kind of helps the flow of just being able to continuing to draw without stopping. Often I'll take
That's nice.
a photo and mess with it. And this is another thing, right? So one of the things that I've done the last few years is I did start a podcast video show about my favorite cartoonist, Alex Toth. So that's called Alex Toth In Depth, and you can find that on any podcast platform, and on YouTube. More than half of those episodes, I have guests for an in discussion episode. And every once in a while on the Toth Instagram, every 5 or 10 posts, I
Could I
feature one of
ask
what he
you
called his
to per,
yeah,
could I ask you to perhaps you see down in the
what's that?
chat, give a link to your podcast?
Yeah, sure.
And
Give
what
me
was
one
it
quick.
called again, more clearly?
Alex Toth In Depth.
Okay, great. And a link would be great. I know people would be interested in that. Thank you.
Yeah, yeah. Oh, absolutely. Give me one quick second. I'll just get the link right now. Do, do, do. Well, where's that message? Do, do, do. Because I'm sharing screen and I'm not sure I'm seeing it right now. Oh, there it is, chat. Got it. There we go. So that's the YouTube link that I just shared, and you should be able to see that and get to it. You're seeing it, right? Or you can pop up.
Yes, looks great.
So
It's right there.
uh, he did. There's been a doodle book. I don't know if I have it right in hand here. Hold on. This is a book that was published by a friend of Toth's, John Hitchcock. And this is called the Doodle Book. And he did sometimes call those kinds of drawings doodles, but he also called them alla prima drawings. And when I'm presenting them online or on the show, that's what I refer to them as well. And what he meant by that anyway, which a term that is more used for oil painting or something, but direct, right? And so Toth would use that uh, markers and just would think right off the top of his head. And so there's no underdrawing or penciling or anything, and at least in those kind of drawings, which is a very difficult thing to do. So I've been trying to train myself to get more and more used to that, to edit while I draw, and to make the choices while I'm putting lines down as best I can. And even if I'm working from a photo here, by going direct to ink, I kind of have to gauge the proportions and the measuring as best I can and just get an instinct for that instead of, getting some guidelines with my underdrawing. Let me get back to this to share more. Oh yeah, this drawing was toward that end. Feeding that obsession of going deeper on the Toth stuff is actually been quite a boon. I've met a lot of people and fellow artists that I never thought I would talk to and meet, and I'm finding it to be a happy thing. That's a rough here. But this, I would say that, for a lot of my client work, um, since the mid 2000s, I've done a lot of work digitally. Um, what I try to do for myself and with students is to encourage them to do a combination or a balance of traditional and digital. Most people I know who work in comics for the 30, 40 years are all never thought they'd give up their pencils or their brushes. And almost most of them that I know are working digitally now. But what I find is when I taught that first class in Intro to Comics 12 years ago, maybe a few were working on a tablet. One actually had been working on their tablet since they were 12 or 13. I'm teaching intro again now this semester, and almost all of them work primarily digitally. So in the class currently, I'm forcing them to use some nibs and tech pens and brushes, and gave them a demo. I'm giving the intro class a demo this week on hand lettering and teaching them the Ames lettering guide and all that old school stuff. Because even if they're going to letter digitally, I still think that they need to understand the principles behind it, lettering, and the benefits of that organic hand lettering. Um, uh, and hopefully, every once in a while, I'll actually convince one to keep working that way. So some of the stuff you're seeing here, I'll do all the drawing very quickly. And then some of what I'll do is augment or do post-production digitally. In this case, I think that background texture is just with a grease pencil on watercolor paper. That's not helpful. This is just the Pentel pocket brush. Someone was over and we were playing games or doing puzzles one night, and I just started putting the lines down. And again, this is that direct with ink kind of look. I find, at least for me, when I would stiffen up when I was younger, even a couple years of doing comics that were published, I found that I just tensed up, and then my line was very controlled. And I find that with a lot of students too. They just freeze up when they go to the final. So as best I can in all my classes, and especially one called Materials and Techniques, is to try to get them to think of line or approach to art on a spectrum, and that maybe you'll try to control on one end and then be expressive and loose on the other. And then maybe the more time you go, then your finished work looks like your sketch work and vice versa. That I think I read in a Steve Root sketchbook decades ago. And then you get that nice middle ground. And it's just tough to trust yourself. And I think you got to either practice it or draw a lot till that starts happening. And you start loosening up with your line. Oh, these were just COVID sketches. COVID hit me, and then it went into my gut. I was just a mess for months. So we all know this, right? You're sketching like crazy, and you can it's a good release, right? To just get some drawings and sketches out, ideas and concepts. This is in watercolor again, but just, oh, what is this? Willem Dafoe in the Van Gogh movie he was in a couple years ago. And, trying to change composition as I do that as well. So you'll see on this, whereas when I was younger, I would really try to clean my line up and make it as perfect and clean and black on the original as possible. I just don't care anymore. I want as many imperfections as possible to come out in the work. And often with a rough or a watercolor paper, I can let that do it for me. I just find all the feathering and the fishbone kind of look that Eisner and Lou Fine implemented, and a lot of feathering that you'd see in guys like Wrightson or Dave Stevens. They have less attraction to me, and I much prefer, you know, a quick line where some of the line drops out. Well, not a perfect Columbo Falk, but there's some good stuff in it. So you can see on the left of that, on the side of, on his shoulder or back there, I just try to go with a really quick stroke and get that expression down. And if you're seeing some streaks in there, that's the kind of thing I'm going for now, rather than some kind of clean look. I'll pull out that fountain pen as often as I can to do gestures. And I have all my students do gestures in class, in almost every class. And I try to like get them to, I try to break them of the habit of everything they're learning in life drawing, where they're measuring the figure and they've got all these balls and brackets and all that. I know there's a place for that, and there's something while they're learning to draw that's important, but I really want them to get the fluidity of the figure. And I would much rather they worry about the line of action and just getting some movement down.
Oh,
So
just
I
a moment.
continue to do those
Ariana's got a
two.
good question down in the chat.
Even
So
if I'm,
she's got a good question.
oh, shall I read that then?
Take a quick look at it. She's asking you specifically in the chat, and then you can go ahead and
Yep.
just and
Would you recommend doing sketches in pen, specifically form of ink? It's pretty readily available tool. What kind of pen are we thinking about, Ariana? When you say pen, what do you mean specifically?
I'm more thinking like just general like pens that you use for like taking notes and such. Because I've noticed.
Please.
Yeah, because I've noticed I like using them for warm-ups because it makes me think more about where I place my lines. But I've noticed that since it's a pretty like consistent shape, it's harder to get line weight.
Yeah. And again, when I came up, I was all about line variation, and still with that, I used a Hunt 102 Crow Quill for a few years before I switched to a brush. I found out I had more control over that, and I was actually encouraged to keep using it because even though I got a very fine line with that, I could get some variation. And before I started my career, maybe 3 years before my first book was published, I happened to see comics artist Walt Simonson at a con in Chicago and then at a comic shop. So I got a lot of one-on-one time with him. And he had some originals of, I think it was a book he did called Star Slammers. And I was like, oh man, I just love the thick lines you're getting with the brush here. And he's like, that's all with the crow quill. And I just couldn't even believe it, because every time that I would try to spread my crow quill out and get a thick line, it would snap the nib. And with some frustration with that, I could never get what Walt was able to pull off exactly. As much as I would try and practice and emulate it, I just couldn't ever do it. And then I switched to a brush, and I was very worried about the brush at first, but that became my main tool for quite a while. When I'm sketching, when I'm just taking notes, I just use one of these Uniball, no, not Uniball. Yeah, it is, the Uniball micro liner. I just have used this for decades, and every once in a while, I catch myself sketching with this. When I'm sketching now, I try to use those tools I mentioned earlier. Again, I can type these out. The Pilot Metropolitan Fountain Pen. The medium is the one that I use. And I love the line in that pen. And again, I work smaller in that case, right? It's got that fountain pen look, but I should probably try the thicker tool. The other one that I ink with as a brush is the Pentel pocket brush. I'm typing all this out so you can refer to it or grab it. And the other one is the Tombow let me see if I can get the, there we go. So those are the three pens that I'm using mainly. And I use them for different reasons. Let's see if I can go back here. So on the current comic I'm doing is called, I'll type this out too, is Blood Orange, and that can be found at noonday-noir.com. So I just sent that in the chat. And I have a very weird process for that, and a lot of it is born out of the things I've been talking about with you tonight, in that I am working. I've got it. Yep. Before every project, I try to choose, I test a lot of different papers and pens and brushes for the look I want for that specific project. So much like I was describing earlier, where you would work larger, and geez, you know, some of those artists like Toth and others would work twice up, right? Until Murphy Anderson got it down to that 10 by 15 size that we know. And in Blood Orange, I'm drawing, I got a moleskin book, and this is a 9 by 12, I believe. I don't like that page. I'll show you another. That's okay. This will do. So I just determined what the size of the final printed book I wanted it to be. And then, you know, made a template for that. And I decided to draw this 2 size. So all the pages on Blood Orange are drawn 2 size with as little penciling as possible. And then as quickly as possible. I try to think in ink, like Frank Miller would say. Instead of doing a more technical line like I would do traditionally, meaning, let me rephrase that. When I was inking someone else and doing it for work for hire stuff, I would tend to do as much of the drawing to nail it down in pencil, and then get a very clean line and have all the decisions made. Therefore, the inking can become more of a technical exercise. I try to do now as much of the drawing in the ink stage as possible. And even if I make mistakes, I'll correct that with whiteout, or more often in post-production digitally. And you know, with the tools and brushes I use in Photoshop for that, most people can't tell.
Yes, sorry, Paul, but because you had the screen share on, what you just showed didn't show up. So
when we come off, I'll show that.
okay.
But back to these. So when I'm working then on a comics page, I'll print these sheets out like I've got here, and there will be 4. There'll be a perfect template for each page is actually 2 size, and what you're seeing with these breakdowns. And I will use that that Uniball fine point for that. But then in the inking, I use the tools that I mentioned earlier. Good night, Christopher. So Ariana, I'm not sure if that answers your question.
Yeah, that was actually really helpful. Thank you. I'm definitely going to check out some of the tools that you listed. I was just wondering if you had any like recommendations for practicing those sorts of things.
Yeah, just paper is really important. If you're using a nib, then you know, cheap paper, or even you know, the sketchbooks the paper is not the higher quality. It's not as high quality as it used to be. All of them are actually kind of worse than they used to be, most of them anyway. Even Strathmore, which I swore by for decades, it's just not as good a paper as it used to be. But picking some kind of Bristol, if you're working with that, is important. And then if you're working with a brush, whether it's synthetic or a dipped sable, then I think what you're going to want to do is choose your paper. Paper is more important than most people give it credit for, and or they think that the brush or the tool is magic or something, or all of it is held in there. But if you want that rough look, or you're doing grease pencil or dry brush, then make sure you're picking a rough paper to work with, and then a plate surface or a vellum surface if you're working for a cleaner line. And one thing I could do is I'm sharing my email, and if you email me, I can send you a PDF of a materials list where there's more materials beyond the ones that I've mentioned here. I can send those PDFs to you if you're interested.
Yeah, that would be amazing. Thank you.
So, you know, even this isn't, boy, I get in my mind's eye, I think, oh boy, this is going to be a great Grace Kelly drawing, but it's almost there. But in this case, you know, I'll draw really rough, and then this is colored with a broad watercolor brush in Photoshop, and then I use what's called a China marker brush in Photoshop. These are part of the Kyle T. Webster brushes within Photoshop. And on my word balloons, on my blood orange comic, or this piece you see in front of you, I'd like to keep that rough look even for the balloon, so it's as integrated as possible in the look. Let me see if I can keep showing more things here. What else do we have? This is all with the Pentel pocket brush, directly with a brush. So sometimes when I'm doing these kind of drawings, even from a photo, the proportions can get way out of whack, but that can actually add to the interest of the drawing, I find, even if they're not a perfect likeness or a caricature, really. But when I'm working loosely with line and with sketches like this, I find that I can practice for the look I want in the finished work. And that this is what I want my finished work to look like now. I don't really want to clean it up much. I want those imperfections and that kind of spontaneity in the work. Every once in a while, I'll do still lifes, like super tight crop still lifes, and you know, the drawing for this in my sketchbook in black and white is almost nothing. It's an abstract little weird piece, but I had the color in mind for how I wanted to go about it, and these are fun little studies to do. Whipping out some alien for this one. So occasionally in my sketchbooks, I will not only play with line or likeness or motion or movement, but start thinking about composition and cropping and so on, which, you know, for any kind of picture making, and then for comics too, is vitally important as far as I'm concerned.
That almost looks like Pfeiffer's stuff.
More gestures. Yeah, I've heard that before on these, right? And I can't get as loose as he was, but oh my, what an boy, Pfeiffer's just a favorite, you know? Whether you're talking about the stuff he did with Eisner way back, you know, he wrote 10 Minutes and other things, or that famous Spirit story. Or these kind of newspaper strip drawings he did. If nobody's, just as an aside, if you haven't read Pfeiffer's work, he's done a handful of children's books. One is called Meanwhile. There's a couple others, as well as graphic novels. And then he did a book that's actually prose, that it's called The Man in the Ceiling. And I would highly recommend that for any artist. And it's especially good to give to a 12-year-old artist, just to be a little subversive. You'll find out what I mean when you when I see it. But boy, Pfeiffer's great. These are more of those breakdowns. And I do call them breakdowns rather than thumbnails or layouts. Layouts is what I always called it, but I never seen the right word for me. And when I'm thinking of comics, I'm trying to think of not only what space it takes up on the page or what the page turns will be or what the flow will be, but how I'm breaking down the rhythm of the panels and the size of the panels. And breakdown seems just like a really good word that's kind of applicable to all phases of that. I find that the thinking that one does in breakdowns, that's my favorite part of the comics making process. But if I weren't doing all those rough sketches to train myself for when I go to finishes on these, on the kind of finish that I want on this comic. I don't think I would be able to execute it. See, doesn't really look like Jack Nicholson exactly, but I still find it to be a worthwhile study. I can't get as rough and on point as someone like Sienkiewicz, and it is tempting to and this has stopped me on some projects or slowed me down to try to draw like someone else. I did one horror story some years ago, and I just wanted to draw like Toth for the whole thing, and it completely jammed me up. So as best you can, if you're being if you're inspired by certain artists, you just got to let yourself come through and trust yourself to do it like you know, like your line. If there's anything that you're looking for in art, if you're going to stand out in any way, it's that unique quality. Nobody will have your line. Nobody will have your line. And if you let that flow, then it will come out naturally, and you won't have to weakly stand on the shoulders of giants. This is kind of a Kirby portrait. This is probably 1.5 inches tall that I've blown up to share online. And, you know, that's, Ariana, you were mentioning like how to use the tool and so on. One of the things I try to encourage students to do is to throw away all their really thin tools. Obviously, you can get some good work and sketches from thin tools, or like a micron 0.05 or something. I know artists who do it. But I really prefer a thicker line that Toth would have encouraged, that helps you simplify and be more deliberate about choosing your line. And you mentioned somebody mentioned something earlier. And my very first guest on the Alex Toth In Depth show was an artist who's now passed a couple of years ago, John Paul Leone. And it was fun during that episode to geek out about our favorite artists. But how he described Toth's line was that it wasn't about what the line was doing, but where it was going. And I think that's a really smart way to put it. And I try to keep that in mind. If I'm working quick, then what I want the line to do will happen. But I'm kind of editing as I draw, and where it goes and choosing the right line is kind of the thing I'm after. I'm probably too careful with these gestures. But this is also training for, you know, when I do, you know, the finished pieces in a comic. I want my line to work like this, so I kind of treat my gestures this way. I could go quicker, right, and do 20 seconds instead of whatever these are, a minute or something. What else do I have here? Yeah, these are pretty fluid. There's some of that Pfeiffer thing going on. Not Pfeiffer, but ish, like you said. And instead of just pulling from old musicals or something, Kelly or Fred Astaire, Sid Charisse or whatever, and I have students draw from that or from Buster Keaton shorts. I'll also try to draw current dancers who are do shuffle step or whatever else, just to get more current movement in the work. I don't like that one. Every once in a while, I'll do a tribute. This from a young lady who lost her life when we pulled out of Afghanistan. And I'm really trying something like this to just be really simple with the line. I'm trying to simplify folds and pick out patterns and still have a full drawing with how I'm laying shadow in. If you just add some black or shadow in the right spots, you can get a lot of mileage out of it, and a lot of body and depth and mass in the drawing, in something that can be flat. And I'm just not into all the feathering that I used to do and so admire. This is a close-up of a Star Wars frame. I kind of like this one still. A little landscape. When I would go out and take pictures for these kinds of studies or pieces, Um, I don't know if anybody else do this. When I crop in my camera, I don't take a wide shot in the camera, whatever I'm taking. I'll just do my cropping right there instead of later on in the in the dark room or something, or in Photoshop. I'm kind of thinking, I can't stop myself from thinking in terms of composition, even when I've got the iPhone in hand now. And every once in a while, I'll kind of nail something, and I'm pretty pleased with how this one turned out. This is again working from a photo, but a shot of jazz artist Sidney Bechet, who's a fave, and you know, there's a lot of extraneous detail in the backgrounds and different things that I had to edit out of the drawing. But again, on this, I did not pencil anything. I just went right in, and I'm trying to even leave some lines out in the hair, and let the eye finish. You know, by lines not touching, then it's got some movement and action to it, and there's an openness to it. It doesn't close off and stiffen up. And if you can leave some lines out at the top of the instrument or in the hair, or at his ankles, then the viewer is finishing. Is an interactive experience, and they're finishing that a little bit more. I wish I could be better at editing, but I keep trying. And when I first got a Cintiq or a big screen and was editing my hand-drawn work with a brush on Bristol board, I'd scan it in, and the first time I got the computer, I started cleaning everything up, and I realized I'd taken all the life out of it. And so now I prefer to do the opposite, and I think there's a lot of life in these kinds of lines, even if they're not, they're exact in a way and inexact in others. I know we're getting to time. If you want to go longer, I certainly can. Tell me what you'd like to do.
Say.
I don't want to keep anybody, but I'm happy to keep sharing.
No, these are wonderful. I'm afraid that a lot of people, we're starting to lose people now because they do have other things they have to do for the evening. And we do
Yep.
schedule an hour talk because it's a lot of work to talk for an hour
Oh,
and to show work for an hour.
I'm so used to it with teaching. I do
You're a
5-hour
teacher,
studio
though.
classes.
You've really got the chops. You've got the speech muscle there. But just in case people do need to leave, I think this has been a very, very useful and beautiful talk, and we've seen some gorgeous line work here and gorgeous inks. And so whether people can, I actually am going to have to go do some things right now because I schedule for about an hour. But if anybody else wants to stay, I'm sure, or if Paul wants to keep talking, that would be marvelous. And I would really like to thank Paul for coming on board and sharing a fabulous career and some really wonderfully expressive ink work.
Thanks again for asking and inviting me. It's really a pleasure, and I enjoyed spending time with you guys.
Oh, definitely.
Thanks again.
Thank you. Hey, Paul, I have a question.
Yeah.
About the way you sign your work. It's OPO or OPAL?
Yeah. Sometime a few years ago, I was thinking about when my wife and I formed our own company, the same year my older daughter was born. She was born under a blue moon, so we were known as Blue Moon Studios, and that was our moniker for some time. And then after, you know, when that work, I decided to move out of corporate work and did teaching instead. I was trying to brand myself and shorten it. My last name Fricke feels kind of harsh, but I've always liked my first name, which is a little softer. And and I had a friend in high school called me Paul, and so I just added another O at the end. And then I was having a dream one night, and I was signing my name, the new signature Paulo on the drawings, and it shortened in the dream to OPO instead. So I woke up and went, that's it. That's simplified it even more, and I'm just going to sign it like that from now on. So it
Well,
kind of
it
became
is
part of my branding.
it is almost Opa, which is grandpa in German and in Greek.
And and we all shout that at the local Greek restaurant there on Lyndale Avenue every time they fire up the flame on the Saganaki.
Yeah.
Well, I am going to have to run off and do the things for the evenings, but you've left us with an especially sketch that's really gorgeous. Oh, and could I very quickly recommend, when we're talking about line drawings and what people do as artists, have you all seen the movie He Won't Get Far on Foot? It's
Oh,
about John Callahan, the artist in a wheelchair. He had a terrible
Yeah.
accident and he can barely draw, but he's hilarious. It's played by Joaquin Phoenix. I'm just recommending it because it's very much about how somebody comes back from being a quadriplegic to being an artist. And the reason I'm recommending it specifically is because of Paul's work, because you will see how much really John's got a lot of wonderful line control, a lot of negative space, a lot of humor. And I think we're kind of working with the same kind of ideas of approaching with a thicker line. So just before I leave, I just want to say again, Paul, thank you. And everybody go watch He Won't Get Far on Foot.
Yeah, I made a note of it, and thanks again for the invitation.
And thank you so much. We really, really, really enjoyed it. I love your work. It's amazing. So I'll
Thank
see
you
you
very
guys.
much.
Oh, and make sure that Bill, that Paul gets an invitation to the drink and draw, where we can draw and have a few drinks and do. It's not in a cafe; it's on Zoom, so you're gonna have to just
Yep.
take your word that you're drinking some if you want to. And we'd love to have any of our guests show up for the drink and draw next week as well.
Yeah, I
So-
think I have that link, so I'll look for the schedule and try to join. Yep, thanks again.
Excellent. So I'll see you guys at the next meeting. And thanks again, Bill, for running a great meeting. And fabulous. Bye,
great.
everybody.
Take
Bye.
care.
Right.
Anybody have any other things they wanted me to show or want to have questions about anything? I'm happy to stay on just a little bit more.
I actually do have a couple questions about publishing, if you'd be okay with me asking them.
Sure.
So one of your works, you mentioned kind of earlier in the meeting, you were talking about how there's a lot of opportunities to kind of publish independently now, but that it's harder to get eyes on it. Do you have any advice maybe for, I don't know, how to get people to actually look at your self-published work?
Yeah, it's tough. And even on my comic, I'm finding it tough to get traction. So we're trying new strategies to do that. And some ideas I had about how I wanted to get my current comic out didn't work as well as I wanted. So we're adapting and trying new ones. I have a friend who has had stuff published with the French publisher Dargaud, and he worked here and self-published, and then he decided, and he had his own accident as well, and dealt with similar stuff to what I did. So he decided, that's it. I'm going to sell to a publisher. They're going to do all the work, and I'm not going to do any more appearances or interviews or social media. And he kind of killed himself online in a fashion. And then after doing that a few years and finding out that didn't work either, he had to reinstitute himself online. And as much as people might not want to share work on social media, I just think it's essential to do it. And there are editors and publishers out there, whether they're at First, Second, or other publishers, who actually keep an eye and maybe save 50 or 70 artists that they just see online, and keep that in mind when new projects come in, when looking for an artist from like a graphic novel, a manuscript or something. I'm trying to think what else. I mean, I think when I talked about choosing paths earlier, I suppose what I would encourage is to just try to find what kind of work you want to do and who you want to reach, and then decide whether you want to go to zine shows and small mini comics kinds of shows, or go to Cake in Chicago, or be in the indie market. or if you want to pitch to a publisher, and whether that's a small publisher, like someone like Uncivilized Books here in Minneapolis, or Drawn and Quarterly, or something like that, or if you want to, go to a bigger publisher, because there still are large companies, big publishers that are also Scholastic and Putnam and Penguin, and are doing that as well. Increasingly, I find a lot of people just put their comics online and publish a web comic. Now the model, right, has changed. 15, 20 years ago, the model was give your web comic away for free once, twice, or 3 times a week, and then make your money from selling t-shirts and prints and printed books. But you were giving it away for free at first. And now Webtoons is a different situation. But I also know people I know people who sign contracts with Webtoons, and then other people who would never, because they don't want to lock themselves into that kind of schedule or lose a little control. And then lastly, if you want to self-publish, I would say that crowdfunding is just the way a lot of people do things now. Finding, reaching the audience that's actually going to pony up some dough to make it possible. That can be the challenge, right? And what you deem to be a successful crowdfunding campaign can vary and change. You kind of have to set your own perimeters or definitions of that. But would you want to submit your stuff to a publisher?
I think it would be interesting to. I really don't have any projects that I've gotten very far working on just yet. I'm kind of just starting out, but I do think it would be an interesting prospect to try it at the very least.
And again, I have former students, graduates who, I tell you the truth, most of them seem to be, they graduate and they network at the conventions, like SPX and other shows. So they meet people that way. And then they try to find an agent as soon as possible so they don't feel they're in the fight alone, and then sell a book. And more are having success with that kind of thing. And it seems kind of backwards, right? But wait, you agent first, what? but it is actually working for a series of my students. And I suppose, though, if you're self-publishing, the real trick is to find out whether you have the temperament for it, and whether you can plug into some kind of system. The system I plugged into when I started out is on its last legs as near as I can figure. In 1973, the direct sales system set up by Phil Suling and Saul Harrison, largely. Phil Suling was the main guy, right? But that set up a non-returnable basis for printing. So when we printed our first comic, we got orders for around 10,000. When we thought we'd get 2 or 3 or 5 or something like that. And then when we, got the money together to print that, we knew that we were going to get, odds were we were going to get paid by the distributors. They couldn't return the books, so there was less risk. But that whole system is while direct sales was the savior of the industry now 50 years ago, it's on the wane. And so, like I said, I would really scan and contemplate the whole landscape of how people are putting comics out. There are so many different models for self-publishing, and people do it in so many different ways. I think the real trick is to know yourself and figure your temperament out, and then be realistic about what your work is and who you want to reach with it. Does that make sense? Or
yeah, that makes a lot of sense, actually. That's actually really helpful. It's actually super interesting when you talk about looking at different platforms and stuff, because I'm actually in a class right now where it's teaching us about social media marketing. So I'm kind of trying to just get at a general idea of maybe what a good path to research that further would be, which I think is maybe. maybe
Go
a
ahead.
little out there, but yeah.
People do that in a variety of ways, right? And some people have an actual system or method for how they go about it. And so a lot of it I found is trial and error. Are you into video at all?
Yeah, actually, I've done a lot of like editing and stuff, and I've made like my own videos and such. But
Well, good. I mean, I bristle as an older dog at video stuff um and uh and the story. You know, I don't like the story on Instagram or Facebook. It just seems too I don't know, ethereal. I like archival stuff. I like something a little more solid that's gonna stay around. I'd like to curate my feed and what people see. And but if you're into the video thing, you can use short video clips on whatever platform you're on. And video is just where how people are interacting online now. So if you can use those videos, short or longer videos, to get an audience that way, um, you can translate that potentially into readership.
okay.
And I hear a lot of people online lamenting, um, you know, that artists have to do all this. Like we have to, you know, be our own marketers and our own business people and do our own taxes and all that. And I'll tell you, as much work as that is, I just wouldn't have it any other way. When I started out, um, I did not start self-publishing in order to become a business person or an entrepreneur. It was just a means to an end. I took my comics seriously and just wanted to get it out there, and then was a success at it. But then I just learned all that business stuff. I was forced to by the situation, and then some years on from that, I kind of embraced it, and I love the freedom of freelancing so much. All these years, all these decades, that uh, even if I made adjustments to the kind of work I was doing or what kind of clients there were, I like to be my own boss and be in charge of that. And if you have that impulse at all, then a lot of that stuff isn't work or feels less like work anyway. I don't mind that I have to. Trust me, I got tired of promoting myself. But if you do enough work a certain way, then word of mouth is going to be the best way to get work anyway. Um, but we're in a changing world, right? With what's published and what the economic models are for these things, and what advertisement pays, and AI or whatever else. There's all kinds of threats and dangers and competitions with these kinds of things. So I guess it's a tough world out there, but we just got to keep pushing on. But if you know yourself and what your temperament is, and then can put yourself in those positions to either produce or to get yourself out there,
Okay.
then you have a chance to connect with an audience that you you wouldn't otherwise. I mean, online is just a good place to do it. See, in a drawing like this too, it's to do dry brush and go directly with ink just takes a lot of confidence. And a lot of times I'll do failed drawings while I'm working. They don't all turn out when I'm working without a net. But even when I switch to the brush from the thinner line, I've got I turn my brush to the side to get that dry brush stroke and a thicker line. And then I'm kind of drawing like you would with charcoal while you're doing a life drawing or something. And when you do dry brush, there's one artist that I would encourage people to look at if you like the dry brush look at all. Italian artist Jordi Bernay, and Bernay is just something. The he did some really rough crime comics called Torpedo 1936 that can be a rough read. They're pretty violent, and some of them are most of them are misogynistic, so it can be a tough thing. But the work is gorgeous, and looking at artists like him gave me a little more confidence to just go for it with these thick lines. Things can go wrong very quickly if you choose the wrong line, but you just kind of have to trust yourself and jump in and go for that big stroke. And when it lands, there's nothing more satisfying, even if they don't always land. See all the lines on the vest or the collar or the front of the suit. There's some searching lines in there. So it's not perfect, but I leave them all in there and didn't edit that because it does create some kind of movement. So sometimes the mistakes can be part of the charm of the drawing.
Did you say that you found that you take your own references, or are most of your like figure drawings from just pictures you find online?
I'm sorry, you cut out a little bit there.
Do you take
where I
most
find them?
Yeah.
So when I was doing storyboard work for Best Buy for a couple decades, and most of those were for commercials, right, to sell stuff, and just Best Buy commercials, all the ones you saw on TV, I did most of those. And for those, they would give me some weird concepts. There was one, the guy's like falling asleep or something in his bathtub, or one was a guy was doing dental work on himself. And when I'm on a tight deadline for something like that, I would get the camera out, I'd figure out all my shots, and then I would corral the family or bribe the girls when they were younger to pose for me, or I'd ask my wife to take pictures of me, and then because then you have the quick reference for that's customized right to the shot you need, and when you're working on the fly, you kind of have to do that. When I'm doing these kinds of direct to ink drawings, some of them like this page, I just draw out of my head and see what comes out, but then some of them I'll work from photos. Often on those on the gesture drawings that I've shared, I will just go online on Instagram or whatever and find a dancer or ice skater or shuffle dancer or whatever that I really like, and then just take a quick, just like a succession of 20 or 30 screen grabs.
Mm-hmm.
And then edit out the ones that I don't like. So I am working from stills, but I try to work so quickly, and I try to edit and choose the ones I'm going where the figure is just working and there's a lot of movement. I try to do some of that already to guide my drawing, and I find that's just really good practice.
Okay.
Did I answer the whole question?
Yeah, you answered the whole question. Thank you.
There was one thought I had in the middle that I wouldn't want. I wouldn't mind not wrapping up the talk on, but just making sure I get across. I had a teacher, I went to some part-time classes at the Chicago Academy of Art, American Academy of Art in Chicago. And one of my life drawing teachers kept saying, drawing is part what you see and part what you know. So I just parrot that to all my students all the time. I have them do not only the gesture drawings, but also observational drawings, either outside or of each other or whatever else, as much as possible, not from people who are posing or sitting still, but moving and just getting used to it. Even drawing like animals at the zoo that are moving all the time. If you train yourself to do that and to do some memory sketching, then all those kinds of drawings, even if someone moves, and even if it's not a complete figure, you can take what you know as you build your visual library in your head, and then complete the drawings on your own. Because you're not only stylizing and editing things out, you're also adding like, oh, well, that's a good hand, but you can add a flourish or a little more bounce to a leg or something with what you bring to it, rather than just rigidly using the reference and copying it. You never want to do that. You always want to edit and change that kind of thing. I hope that's helpful too.
That is really helpful. Thank you.
Oh, these are a couple different haters. I forgot I did these two different ones. I was just really into Barry on HBO, and this one's almost caricature-like, and this one's a little rougher. But, again, this drawing is pretty. It's not that big, really, maybe a few inches wide. But I like the quality it has when I blow up. And when I'm using that fountain pen, that Pilot Metropolitan fountain pen, I'm not using dip ink on that. but there's that little beat up quality that it has at the beginning or the ends of the lines where it kind of dots. And then you've got this little dance of these dots and dashes that I really like. And then I augment, I do all the quick drawings with that just to get the line down. And I'm even editing out and not touching all those. And then I go in with the Pentel pocket brush. You know, I could on the back here feather and do all these different feathering lines in traditional comics inking, but I'm much more interested in visualizing, you know, what I'm seeing. I'm editing things out from the photo. There's all kinds of folds that I don't include at all. And then there's some that I change as I'm going, but I'd much rather just do that quick stroke for one of those lines than try to be very precise with in a way that can really stiffen it up. You know, Hitchcock psycho studies, and even this figure of Norman Bates, because I'm working, you know, right to ink. There's some distortion that's happening. He becomes even taller and more elongated, and sometimes those kind of distortions that happen when you're working without the underdrawing can prove beneficial. I can't remember whose swing this was. Yeah, I don't recall. Ed Williams, maybe? Who's that? There's a cartoonist who did a lot of Bill Maudlin. No, Bill, was that his name? Bill Melt? I can't remember the name. Martin, Marston. I can't say again.
Joe.
Yeah. And this isn't quite that, you know, but there is movement in those lines that I really like. And anytime I'm doing some kind of sports drawing, I'm trying to, if not cartoon it up, I'm just trying to simplify it to really get the movement and the tension, you know, of the folds in the clothing and in the muscles and legs and such. You want to feel that. Uh-oh. Yeah, see, there's all kinds of things wrong with this drawing, but there's things that are good about it. So even if it's really rough and not everything's precise, I will still share something like this, even if everything's not perfect. There are qualities in it that I like. And you know, the other thing too is if you're posting stuff up, maybe everybody doesn't like what you do. If I were chasing like a lot of follows, I probably could get a bigger following. By doing bigger pieces, but I'd much rather put my time into the bigger work into finished comics pages and have that be my work, and then just keep the ball rolling and keep things fresh with very quick drawings. But not everybody, this isn't for everyone, you know. I find though that I've attracted the followers and made connections with people who are of like mind, and that's more valuable to me. This is not a perfect Orson Welles sketch. It became very elongated. It isn't Wells at all, really, but I like the quality of it. So to me, it's still a successful drawing because I'm not really going for like this. There's just some quality in the eyes or the beard or the hair that I'm going for, and you know, the ones that don't turn out, I don't post. And every once in a while, the teenager in me comes out, and I'll still, you know, someone will ask me to do a convention sketch of a superhero I inked or of their favorite or whatever else. And, you know, but when I'm doing this, I'm still thinking of Alex Toth in some fashion and trying to spot the blacks on that. I'm not sure what the great point is, but I'm glad I made the occasional good point. I'm not sure which one Roger is taught enough or not. I think this is Pops. This is Louis, I think. Boy, I love doing these. I just love doing these. If I could get a gig just doing illustrations like this, I would just love it. Just do some jazz, you know, portraits. You know, Miles, there's just stuff you can play with it. With the instrument, there's interesting compositional things you can do and all that. So if you know anybody who wants Jazz illustrations, let me know. See, I was having a rough time. So if I'm not posting comics on my social media that aren't my published comic on the at the website, I'll just take sketches that I'm doing of interesting characters or whatever, and then I'll just before I post, I'll just marry it to some quote or some thought that comes to my mind. In this case, I really, after some difficult health stuff, I really did feel pretty good for the first time in a while. So this can be also an outlet for personal stuff. There's another one. There's Miles. Yeah, this one must not have been on rough paper. This is on a different kind of cleaner, smoother surface, and it just has a different quality. So you really can't get too much dry brush on that. But in the old days, all that wiggly line stuff in the folds and in the music notes, I would probably clean up, and this would not be attractive to me. And now I just wouldn't want to do it any other way. I really like the quality that I'm getting from that. And again, when I'm putting those down, some of that is just a stylistic flourish, but a lot of it is just where my hand starts going when I'm drawing. I can't always, there's a bit more of a circular kind of a sweep, like S curves that happen in some of the drawing. And I found that, when I was younger, aside from that, all that feathering, I would kind of stylize stuff in my cartooning and in my line work with some kind of angular stuff that wasn't really natural. And I found it to be an affectation, and I had to kind of train myself out of it, kind of unlearn things. Either with that or anatomy stuff. I got my hands on some Bern Hogarth books that were ubiquitous back then in the day. And I had to unlearn some stuff I learned from that. Probably took me 5 years to unlearn habits that I'd gotten from that. So, no matter what age you are, you're always learning and unlearning and training and trying to get better. No matter you're starting out at 15 or 20 or you've been doing it for decades. I'm still trying to figure out, how to get out of the drawings the quality of the line that I want. This one I think is pretty successful. I can't remember the name of this jazz guitarist though. Roy, I don't remember. I'm sorry. Maybe it says now I'm curious. Does it say? No, this says blues man. Not helpful. All right, I probably worn out my welcome here. I'm sure my wife is waiting to watch something with me before bed. But I really don't want to overstay my welcome here. But if anybody, are there any other last thoughts or questions you might have before we part?
No.
Or are we good to go? How do I get out of the sharing? Stop share. There we go. Thanks again for the invitation.
Nope.
And thank you.
Enjoyed.
Yeah.
A pleasure.
Did I
Thank you very
see?
much for this.
Say again.
As I said, it was a pleasure. Thank you very much for doing this, and look forward to hearing more from you in the future.
Yeah, my pleasure. I'll see if I can join you guys for drawing sometime.
Okay.
And Ariana, if you do have questions or want some of those files that I mentioned, just email away and I'll get that stuff to you.
Yes, and
Yeah.
and everybody, if anybody wants to have a more less formal meetup, we have our Thursday drink and draw next week at 6:30 Pacific time. The event, the link to that will be on. We have it on Eventbrite now, but I'll definitely have it on our Facebook page. I'll be plugging it on our Facebook group very soon next week if anybody is interested. But
Okay,
otherwise,
thanks, Bill.
no problem. Thank you, everybody, for coming, and everybody have a great night.
Thanks,
night.
everyone. Take care.
Yep, bye-bye.